And we are live. Hello, everyone. I am number one Marmaduke fan, and today I am joined by Iron Man expert, the Right Geek.
Hello, everyone.
So, the Right Geeks channel is under some weird restrictions. The YouTube God Emperors are cracking down on everybody. So today we will be continuing our series on Iron Man, which has been hosted on the Right Geeks channel, linked in the description below. But today's episode we're going to be hosting on my channel, and today we are discussing Iron Man 2020 number 5, or new Iron Man, as Right Geek and I call it, and excellent Marvel Adventures Iron Man series from 2008. Maybe real quick, the Right Geek, for people who follow my channel but may not be familiar with your content. Tell us a little bit about kind of like your special interests. You're into science fiction. You're into Iron Man.
Yeah, I will. I cover right now. I'm really covering comics mostly, but I do talk about um, the science fiction community sometimes if something happens that I feel deserves comment. I have talked about Star Trek before in the past because I am a Trekkie. Um, and you can go back over my old content to find some of that stuff. Uh, And I also have some podcasts with some science fiction authors that I'm in a community with. I just interviewed them a while back on their works and their thoughts on different issues of the day. But currently, I've kind of turned in more of a comics direction, and especially with Iron Man in particular, because Iron Man is my favorite Marvel character, arguably my favorite comic book character in general. um so some of my content has been going over like some of the historic issues that are considered some of the best, or at least the most noteworthy. um and then I'm also reviewing the new stuff that's coming out that's Iron Man related, which is why we were having these series of streams on my channel talking about new Iron Man, aka Iron Man 2020, aka Christopher Cantwell's Iron Man, and discussing basically what this current run gets right and what it gets wrong, from the perspective of someone who has read basically every mainline Iron Man title there is.
Yeah,
I've got a real sense of historically where this character has been, how he was originally established. So I can sort of I'm in a unique place to counter some of the things that some of the modern writers are getting wrong,
right.
basically.
So
Yeah.
in this series thus far, our story so far, Korvac, who's kind of like this infinite intellect. He's fought the Avengers in the past. He's returned to an android body, and he's deceived Tony Stark. He's gained a massive amount of electrical power, and he's trying to gain godlike power because he believes that as God, he could run the universe better. Meanwhile, Tony's
Mhm.
been going through kind of like this inner struggle where he worries he's too rich, he's too powerful, he's out of touch with the normal guy. So he's retired from some of his, extracurricular stuff. He's tried to like strip down the Iron Man armor and get back to superheroing. And I guess he's got some like doubts in himself where am I exactly the same as the people I'm fighting? And he's been teaming up with Hellcat to take on Korvac. And I think last we left off, uh, Hellcat was hospitalized, and Korvac is making his kind of like final preparations to seize Galactus's power and become a god. So, what do you think of issue 5 overall? Is it working any better for you than the previous issues?
Uh, Not exactly. I mean, there are a couple in my blog post on the subject over on my Iron Man blog. I did mention a couple of things I thought were positive. Positive number one, uh, there is much less in the way of nagging in this issue. And as a matter of fact, there is one point where Misty Knight basically starts to nag Tony, and Tony actually comes back and says, yeah, I've been hearing a lot of that lately. I don't want to hear it anymore. Which is
Yeah,
like, whoa, actually he demonstrated some strength there and kind of pushing back against somebody else attempting to nag him about how terrible he is. So that was one positive. And then the other positive, just in my mind, was the ending to some extent, in the sense that I've looked ahead, because Comixology kind of gives you what's coming up next. When you get to the end of the book, they say, "Oh,
Yeah.
in issue number 6, here's what's coming next." So I've read what the advertising copy says for issue 6, and there's one element in that, related to how this comic book ends, that I'm actually somewhat excited for, depending on how it gets executed, because it does, um, basically it's a we seem to be headed towards a armor as literal life support plot,
Hmm.
which is very, very retro Tony, and fills me with a lot of excitement, because that was one of the things that attracted me to the comic book version of Tony Stark to begin with, was the fact that, in the beginning, yes, his armor was literal life support. So if they're going back to that, then that actually is holding true to the original stated purpose of this new run, which was to get Tony back
Back
to
to
his
basics.
basics and back to
Yeah.
his roots. Yeah. So that's actually fulfilling the promise, if it gets executed correctly. So I am somewhat excited for issue 6, just based on that. So those were the two positives. But and of course, I'm still largely pleased with the art team on this book.
Keifu,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Uh, and oh, and the other good thing, I didn't mention it in the blog, but now that I'm thinking about it now, the 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 mandatory opening scene with Hellcat did not go on too long this time, so that's another positive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I still think it's a little weird that, with each issue, he doesn't. It seems like he never wants to pick up right where they left off, but he jumps forward a lot in time. So then there's stuff that you miss, like, wait, so, like, how did they get out of that? How did they get out of that situation? And how is Patsy now in this? She's kind of in lockup, I guess, in a insane asylum or jail or something. Like, how do we get from she was basically taken over by Korvac and was this, lightning bolt charged power, and then she gets disabled by Halcyon, but like, how do we get from that point where issue 4 left off all the way to, oh, and now we're in lockup and she's okay and not currently hearing Korvac's voice at right this second. Like,
He's
he
also not
likes to
he's not
jump
doing the
forward in
thing where
time
it's
a
like
lot.
you think he'd do kind of like the mandatory scene where it's like they're in the hospital and Tony says, "Wow,
Yeah,
she was sure shaken up after that last fight."
yeah, yeah,
He kind
yeah.
of just expects you to know exactly what happened last time.
Right. So there's not, um I guess, like, he doesn't want to, I guess he just doesn't like the idea of doing a recap, other than what gets written on the opening title page. But back in the old days, they would have, like, acknowledged in the comic itself, like, what happened last time, so that anyone who is jumping in, this being their first comic ever, would be able to jump in without going, "Oh God, what exactly did I miss?" Like, um, because in the old comics they used to spell it out pretty well, so that you could literally pick up an issue from there and basically follow along.
I also kind of like how in previous issues the Tony has a god complex thing was something they showed, but they didn't. They told you, but they didn't show you. Like, it was just Tony musing about, "Do I have a god complex?" And in this issue, we actually get to see him make a tough decision that kind of fits in with that theme. Actually, like, he
Hmm.
basically decides to use Patsy as bait,
Hmm.
knowing that she's pretty mentally on edge because of her past traumas.
Hmm.
But that's kind of like the hard decision he has to make if he's going to lure out Korvac. So kind of a jerky thing, but a jerky thing he's doing because he's trying to strategize and outwit a highly intellectual enemy. And it's really
Right.
heartfelt when then he comes and finds Hellcat and she's basically reduced to gibbering
Yeah.
because of her past mental trauma. And he's just trying to hug her and give her some comfort, but then he's got to go fight and finish this battle. That's
Yeah.
pretty heartfelt, and it's balancing him.
Yeah. I did have a little bit of a little bit of a problem with how that was executed. Not because I believe that Tony is incapable of that kind of manipulation, but because in the past, like even when he's at his most god complexy, um, he never resorts to that first. Like, okay, so if we go back to some of the famous storylines in which he was kind of Tony Stark at peak, I know what's the right thing to do, and I don't want anyone interfering with what I want to do. Um, let's say we have Armor Wars, for example. So in Armor Wars, there's one point where he realizes that he has to attack a government-run facility because the the mandroids, I think, are being used to guard that facility. It's like a supervillain prison, essentially. Um, have his tech, and he's trying to capture all of it, so there's no chance that any unsavory entity is going to get hold of it. And while he is plotting the infiltration of this prison so he can get all of his tech and disable it, Captain America basically figures out um, what Tony is doing. And at this point, Captain America knows who he is because, sometime back in the Avengers comic, everyone found out. Um, so, uh, so Captain America uh, confronts him in a restaurant and says, "You know, I know what you're doing, Tony. I know who you are, and I know what you're doing, and I'm here to tell you that you need to stop because now I know that you're going to go to this supervillain prison, right, where your tech is being used, and I'm here to tell you that that's the wrong thing to do because he's Captain America, and at that point he was still, obey the law, Captain America, essentially,
Yeah.
and and Tony uh tries to convince him not to interfere. Um, and it kind of comes to an impasse. So they walk away from each other. And then Tony goes ahead with his plan. And Captain America goes ahead with stopping him. And they get into this confrontation. And it's really only when we get to the edge of, okay, there's no way I'm going to be able to convince Steve to stay out of my way, that he resorts to basically hitting him with an electric shock to disable him so that he can, hitting Captain America with an electric shock to disable him so that he can go and do what he wants to do. So like in that storyline, that was Tony very much in, I'm going to do what I want to do, right? Because this is what I believe is right, and I don't want anyone interfering. That's kind of at his peak complex level. But he really had to be pushed to resort to actually injuring Captain America mildly in order that he may proceed with what he wants to do. Then if you go forward in time, oh, you wish to comment? I won't
So he
go to the
has this
next thing.
flaw, but he has this flaw, but it kind of like it takes some pushing to get him to. It's not like he just instantly caves.
Yeah. So there's
And he
hints
usually
of
has a
it.
really good reason for bringing out like the his most asshole version of himself, basically.
Right. And then like I didn't talk about Armor Wars in the blog post either, but every time I write a blog post and I think about it more, it's like, oh crap, I should have added this, I should have added this. But what I added in the original blog post, I talked about the first Civil War, and I mentioned that that's really Tony at peak God complex. But even then, like, there are several times in that event that Tony parlays with Steve and says and tries to convince him again that he's right. So and um and always and actually in that event there is no time when um but that well there's the one issue in the whole Civil War event well, not the one, but one of the issues in the whole Civil War event that kind of made it worth it for me, even though I kind of hate the idea of it in general, um, is that there's an issue where they kind of parlay at the original Avengers Mansion, which was destroyed in the Avengers Disassembled event a couple years earlier. Um, and there's this long conversation between Tony and Steve, in which they're each trying to argue to the other that they're right about the Superhero Registration Act. And so there's this long conversation between them where they're trying to talk it out, but eventually it gets to the point where no one is willing to drop their stubbornness and admit that maybe they might be wrong, or maybe there's something that the other side has a point about. So at the end it devolves into an actual fist fight. But again, it takes almost an entire issue to push Tony to that point where he's willing to actually, beat up on a friend because he's basically given up on trying other means to get what he wants that are that are less shady. So the one problem I have with the manipulating Hellcat in this issue is that it feels like Tony jumped to that too early. It felt to me like Tony might have been able to explain to Patsy what he was thinking. And I think we talked about this when we were going over the last issue, when it became apparent in the text for the first time that Patsy was being, Korvac was basically whispering in Patsy's ear. And we were talking about, well, what's the explanation for that? Or shouldn't they have a page where Tony and Patsy are like, huh, that's weird. You seem to be connected to Korvac. Well, why don't we use this in some way? Like, it's weird and it's troubling, but why don't we use this in some way? I feel like there should have been a conversation between Tony and Patsy in which Tony says basically, we can use this maybe to draw Korvac out. And maybe Patsy would have agreed to that. So I feel like jumping to I'm not going to tell her that this is what I'm doing, I'm just going to do it, is jumping to the manipulation before other means have been tried. And and based on past history, like I can even bring up Hickman Avengers too, because in Jonathan Hickman's New Avengers, in the storyline, Tony agrees to mind wipe Steve so that Steve doesn't interfere with their plans to stop the Universal incursions from destroying all the universe, essentially. But he doesn't agree to mind wipe Steve until they've had a conversation with Steve first to see if they can actually pull him over to his side. So again, it's like, I'm not saying that Tony won't resort to, manipulation or, otherwise, something that injures another person because he needs them neutralized so that he can do what he thinks is the right thing to do. The sort of God complexy thing that he is occasionally capable of. But again, that's always his last resort, never his first.
Right. Something I've said before in previous reviews, if there's going to be something important that we need to remember later, because comics are a visual medium, you want to show it and you kind of want to make a visual point out of it, even if it's like an internal moral conflict. Like you have to, show Tony and like light and dark. Will I choose the light side or will I choose the dark side? And then leaves you with that kind of like, you kind of like, my thought is, you have to write it for the 6-year-old or the 8-year-old reader. And when you're writing it for the 8-year-old reader, the 8-year-old reader needs a visual representation of the internal conflict. And because we're kind of skipping over whole scenes or whole important steps for Tony, it's kind of like it comes out in the middle of a fight scene and then we're on to the next thing.
Right. So so the kind of priors that would have to come before Tony would resort to that kind of move did not happen where we could see them. If they did happen, they might have happened off panel. Maybe I'll write fan fiction about it that will fix that. I don't know, but it would not happen. He would not resort to that first, not based on what I've read. And I've read everything. So I've seen Tony at his most most, at maximum God complex. I know it's right, and I don't want anyone interfering with what I want to do. And even at those points, even when he's at his, highest level of asshole, he doesn't resort to hurting people before he has tried other avenues.
I get you, yeah. But you said you were kind of hopeful for issue 6 based on previews you've read of what's to come. I mean, he is kind of left. It's this classic thing where he's left injured, and in all his weapon systems are in critical condition. But he really looks like he might be. I got the impression it looked like that the guy broke his neck. So there might be like a serious, like long-term health implication for Tony at the end of this issue.
Right. Yeah, and well, the issue 6 description says that that issue is apparently going to start with him in triage, so that's a little bit better because it actually does pick up where the last issue left off, essentially. He's in triage, basically hanging on to life by a thread, and his allies basically determined that he has to be like enclosed in his armor 24/7, or his body will completely fall apart, essentially.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I mean, that's good. That's actually, first of all, it sounds like they're not going to just jump forward in time and, he's okay again without explaining, like, without explaining what exactly they did. I also like that, also in that description, there was mention of Rhodey coming in. Now, how Rhodey escapes Korvac, that might be something that they will jump over with no explanation, which will make me raise the alarm of, hey, that's something you need to explain too.
Or at least give us a flashback,
Yeah.
How did you get away? Well, that's a story all by itself.
Yeah, exactly. But there's mention at the end of the description that, Rhodey's gonna come in. Rhodey's gonna come in and be by Tony's side, but there's a question at the end. But is he there to be, Tony's backup, or is he there to bench Tony because he's starting to go a little bit crazy with this Korvac situation? And that I was actually kind of hopeful about too, because I mentioned in our previous discussions that one of the things that's really bothered me about this run so far is that all of Tony's old friends have not yet come by and say, dude, what's going on with you? Like, so if in issue 6 we see Rhodey come in and say, dude, seriously, what's going on with you? You're not really acting like yourself, and you seem to be going a little bit manic, a little bit crazy about this current situation. Maybe you need to chill for a little bit. So that might be, maybe Christopher Cantwell saw the stream and now he's like answering some of our complaints. I don't know. I'm too small a channel, I think, for that to actually be true. But
you are one of the, like, a lot of the bigger channels don't necessarily provide like at minute by minute, like right when it comes out, commentary. So even if you are a smaller channel, if you're providing kind of like right as it's coming out comments, that's like, if someone's looking for initial feedback, that's what they find.
Yeah. And my videos, like even the ones that I did on my own for the first couple of issues, they were like, 36 minutes, 30 minutes. So they were long and they were pretty extended commentary, So yeah, maybe somebody was looking at the extended commentary. Yeah.
It was interesting for me to get your perspective on kind of like Tony Stark's broader character, because I didn't feel as annoyed at this issue as I did in previous ones.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the previous ones, like the skipping over things and the Tony kind of being all sad, kind of got on my nerves. Like, go fight a bad guy, and we finally got some fighting bad guy stuff in this. Even stuff like having the goofy, C-list heroes like Frogman show up. It's a little goofy, but at least he's having fun and bringing in a few more, additional superheroes, and that's one of always the fun opportunities, is to mix up the team with some unusual side characters. Do you have any closing thoughts on Iron Man #5?
The other thing I would say is that I was not 100% I would agree with you that this issue was not as annoying as the others, even for me, because I am primed to notice more things that are wrong with it just because of how much knowledge I have about this particular character. But I wasn't really all that happy with how Tony was portrayed as a leader, with the C-listers essentially, because again, like even with that god complex flaw, and even with that kind of note of I know it's right about him, um, I don't feel like he would just say, oh, we'll survive because you have me, so just do what I say. Um, like, just speaking as someone who knows his history, this is a guy um who has started several companies or has run several companies. He's started quite a few because he lost his company in the 80s. So and then he had to build back up with a entirely new company, and all that. And uh, and as the CEO of his various companies, he, generally speaking, has been able to inspire the loyalty of at least his ground level employees, not necessarily his corporate board, but certainly his certainly his ground level employees, to the point that when you get to like the nadir of um, his alcoholism in the early to mid 80s, um, and we have Obadiah Stane taking over Stark Industries in that period. When Obadiah Stane takes over, like all of Tony's former employees are like, "Well, we're leaving too because we're not going to work for you. We're loyal to Tony, right?"
Yeah.
So, yeah. So wait a second. So this is a guy who's run several successful-ish companies, right? And has clearly inspired the loyalty of many of his employees. So, quick question: how could he have done that unless he was actually a decent leader who could explain his rationale to people, and reach out to his employees and uh, and demonstrate effective leadership, right?
There's a difference
So,
between commanding respect and demanding respect from people, right?
right, exactly. So that hit me a little bit wrong too. Um, in the same way that his manipulation of Patsy hit me a little bit wrong because it felt like we were jumping to like asshole Tony much too quickly. There has to be several intermediate steps before we get to that point, basically.
Right.
Um, yeah, but I think you're right that this issue was better than the first four. It was definitely a lot less annoying than the first four, for sure.
I saw one of those kind of like, weird YouTube channels where they like analyze people's body language and stuff. And they actually had one on Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. And the theme of the
Uh-huh.
video was you fire a warning shot before you're a jerk to someone. Like, let them know that you're about to lay down the law, and then you go, and then you, after that, then you be a little bit more aggressive. It was really
Yeah,
interesting, kind of tied into what you said. It also interests
yeah,
me that
yeah.
they're like non-comic book nerds who will analyze Tony Stark's movie character to, unpack his charisma. This is
Okay.
not the Hellcat I knew from the old days, says Warzard of the Bored Time Lord. Yeah, I guess this is kind of like new post-feminist Hellcat, wouldn't it? She wasn't as
Yeah,
annoying this issue. She was like bit more, vulnerable. She has weaknesses and things that are bugging her that she's got to struggle and overcome. So she's not just a strong, implacable, robot late feminist lady. Uh,
yeah,
so still, I'm overall kind of meh about the 2020 series. So currently
yeah,
in my, I'm sharing a window and I've got Marvel Adventures open. I don't recall this book at all, but I do remember this series. I think like my library used to have books in this series. And one of the things I liked about it is sort of how unapologetically for kids this series was. Well, it's
right.
still it still had elements of things I think would still appeal to older comic book readers. So they've got the basic, Tony Stark has to beat a bad guy, simple plot. The plot's always wrapped up by the end of the issue. So kind of like their 30-minute Saturday morning cartoon style plots. But they give you some neat stuff like, techno babble for how the suit works. They have neat stuff like Tony Stark being a playboy scientist and doing daring and adventurous things like flying around the globe. And I guess we're starting with issue 1, right? Do you want to talk about the series as a whole first, or maybe talk about one issue at a time first?
Let's just do one issue at a time.
All righty. So in issue 1, we get a retelling of the origin story of Iron Man. And unlike kind of the classic Tales of Suspense version, we get a little bit more moral gray area for Tony, where his company may be selling, his technology is being used by AIM to repress a third world country. And Yinseng actually shows up at a Tony Stark presser and blurts out a bunch of names at him. You're responsible for my countrymen dying. This sort of bugs Tony. He argues back with him. But he asks Rhodey and Pepper Potts to look into it. And sure enough, AIM is taking advantage of some of Tony Stark's technology. As he's kind of like being a flyboy and flying around his airplane that doesn't use anything but solar energy, he's captured by AIM and the sexy scientist supreme of AIM. And just like in the movie and in the classic issue, he and Yinseng are put to work on a weapon, and they sort of creatively use the opportunity to build the Iron Man armor. Yeah, it plays out it plays out a little bit different from the classic issue, where one of my favorite bits was when Stark and Yinseng both break out of the cell each in their own set of iron armor, and one is red and one is gold. So it kind of evokes the classic golden Iron Man armor he used to have, but even kind of like foreshadows like the red and gold as significant colors for Iron Man. And I kind of like that they gave Yinseng like this big epic moment for himself in the Iron Man armor. So that was kind of a neat departure. And I guess it has Tony Stark kind of like learning responsibility. It's his with great power comes great responsibility moment where he and Yinseng respect each other now, but as Yinseng dies, he kind of gives Tony this mission that I'm dying with no regrets because I know I've done everything I can for my fellow man. I hope that you can say the same when it's your time, Tony, which is nice because it kind of like underscores mortality. Like Tony's a sick man who's near death, and now his life is I'm going to live my life so that when I die, I can die without regrets because I know I've done what's right by my fellow man. So, do you have any thoughts about how this differs from the original version of his origin story?
Well, I would say the biggest departure or the most significant departure is the addition of the moral gray area, and I think that they did that because it sort of lines up with more the Ultimates line, which was coming out around this time, and it also lines up more with the more modern interpretations of Iron Man that were coming in starting at the beginning of the 2000s, and it may have also been an anticipation of the movie version as well, because it lines up more with those more modern interpretations of Iron Man than the original Tales of Suspense run. But since I kind of see the Marvel Adventures line as, again, a separate universe in the same way that I see the movies as a separate universe, I didn't really have any problem with that kind of departure because, if it's an Elseworld, you can do whatever you want,
And it's just reintroducing a new generation to a classic story. It follows the pattern of the classic story. It just maybe adds a different emphasis or element than the classic story had. And he would develop, even classic Tony Stark, he would develop some of that gray area later with his alcoholism. They're just bringing it out a little bit more upfront at the beginning now that, he is a big successful billionaire, but he also has kind of like this irresponsible side to him as well.
Yeah, and actually, classic 616 Tony Stark, starting in the 70s, they start they start bringing in the moral gray area. Even before the alcoholism, we start to see Tony doubting his weapons making, starting in the 70s. So even in the classic Tony Stark, you know, writers after Stan Lee were seeing that as a moral gray area, and were now bringing that element into the comic. So it's not, you know, it's not a hardcore departure that has nothing to do with the character whatsoever, you know. So it doesn't bother me so much as departures I've seen in some of the more recent runs of Iron Man that really are just kind of violations of where he's been before.
It's also kind of nice that they get to say, okay, now that we're going to retell the story, let's bring in some of the supporting cast a little earlier. Whereas, you know, like Rhodey might come around 10 years later in the old comic books. Now that we know that Rhodey's a popular character, let's just bring him right in as like Tony Stark's, you know, right-hand man. Wizard the Bored Time Lord says the Marvel Adventures line was not bad. I heard Darwin Cook was supposed to do the line. One of the reasons he punched an editor that worked there. Lol. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Tidbit from Warzard.
Okay. Wow.
I didn't know that. I wonder if that's fake news. Probably not. All right. So with issue 2, oh yeah, Enter the Dragon. So this is a Mandarin episode, written by Fred Lee Lente, penciled by James Cordero. So what's neat about this is another story that brings in, you know, that little gray area aspect of it, but still at its heart, it's still like a children's adventure story where Tony has workers in China, and he thinks that, you know, all of my workers must be happy with me. And then the Mandarin apparently takes over his Chinese factory, and he overhears Chinese workers bad mouthing Tony Stark, and this bugs him because it kind of like goes against his self-image of himself. Like, am I really seen as like an evil billionaire jerk? And Rhodey kind of like sensitively says, well, you know, far be it from me to tell you that as a billionaire, you're out of touch with the average working man. But it's kind of like you're trying to let him off soft, but you are a little out of touch, Tony. Which is neat. It's almost exactly the theme that the 2020 comic was getting at.
It's almost exactly the theme that Iron Man 2020 is getting at, but it's doing it in a much less annoying way. And I can't put my finger on why it's less annoying, but but maybe it is because of the lighter touch, and because we're not bringing in all the BS about his supposed white privilege. They're emphasizing instead his class, which is a much more valid way to question his privilege. It's not white privilege; it's class privilege, essentially.
I also kind of like the angle that Mandarin is descended from Genghis Khan, and he plays that up. So, you know, when with the woke glasses on, why does Mandarin look like a stereotype? Well, he's doing it on purpose to kind of evoke Chinese history, you know, as a way of appealing to their national identity. I am the descendant of the great Genghis Khan. I control dragons. So it's a purposeful thing. He's playing himself up as an ancient Chinese mystical enemy. And there's even some like fun stuff, like the panel I've got is Rhodey, you know, being a smart aleck and describing like how he's got these amazing 10 rings that are like a souped up Swiss army knife. Like he's got tons of neat little abilities with his rings. So, and some of this stuff comes across in the fight scene. Like he uses his lightness ring and darkness ring at the same time to overwhelm Tony's armor's defenses. So it's neat. He's matched up with a formidable opponent physically, but he's also got like this moral doubt that maybe I am a big fat jerk, just like my enemy says I am. Now it works out at the end where Mandarin was actually manipulating all these people. So I guess maybe it's not true in the end. It maybe like it's good for Tony to worry about whether he's out of touch as a billionaire, but he actually is a well-meaning guy, and good triumphs over evil at the end. We find out that he isn't the evil, you know, bleepity bleep that Mandarin says he is.
Yeah, and I actually consider that somewhat of a wuss out, because I think a better ending would have been that some of the employees actually were a bit dissatisfied, and what Tony could do as the guy who who, because of his class privilege, is a little out of touch, is he could, because he's also a well-meaning guy, he could listen to the complaints and respond to them, and that might have been a better, much less wussy of an ending if we're dealing with that theme, you know.
Yeah, especially with China.
China.
The working conditions in China are terrible, and we gotta stop sending all our money over to China.
Yeah. It is a little weird to read it now and say, oh yeah, Tony's got outfits in China. Yeah.
So maybe that's
right at the moment, I'm trying to figure out how I can de-Chinify my life. Like.
There's also some like fun stuff where at this point he still had his secret identity. So there's the fun classic stuff of, well, I'm gonna wonder why Tony Stark goes to China and I ends up in China. Yeah, and some of the classic things like trying to find a body double to preserve your secret identity, all that great stuff. And they have fun with it too. Like he needs Rhodey as a backup. They're kind of hinting that Rhodey might get into the armor himself soon because he's the backup guy who has to wear the Iron Man armor to be a body double.
Yeah.
They're making use of the character. He's not just there; he's actually he's contributing to the team effort, basically.
Right.
Any closing thoughts on Marvel Adventures #2, the Mandarin story, before we jump into 3? Then Enter the Dragon.
No, I think I pretty much covered what I would say about that issue.
Alrighty, so
but except the general. Well, I'll save it to the end. End. Yeah.
So issue 3, The Creeping Doom, starts with in media res with Iron Man nearly asphyxiating and not sure how he got there, covered in vines, and so then he thinks back,
right,
and he receives a grant proposal. It's the classic thing where a mad scientist says he can restore life and greenery to a desert area. So they show up to interview the guy. He's a little nutty. He's already finished his research and his brilliant schemes without Tony's help, and he likes plants more than he likes people. So he does some creepy talk about how he loves plants. He puts Pepper Potts in a sexy Poison Ivy kind of outfit and basically announces his plans to erase human life so that plants can take over the world. When he, after the crazy scientist takes on the role of Plant Man, he kind of makes a speech that I will be the opposite of Iron Man. He's all about technology. I'm all about nature and restoring nature to its original state. Iron Man goes after him and gets gummed up kind of like by plant sap, and he basically can't move. His air vents are clogged. He's slowly asphyxiating. So in a tough spot, he manages. After remembering how he got there, he manages to break free, and kind of ends like right in the middle of a fight scene. He torches a factory that's full of defective batteries that blow up. And then right at the very end, boom, they escape the fire explosion. Cool guys walk away from explosions. The end.
Yeah.
We infer that the criminal was brought to justice, and they went back home.
Right.
In my opinion, just kind of like a very fun, go stop the evil scientist story. The in media wrestling was kind of cool and added a little tension, but very much a bare bone bad guy. I got to go stop the bad guy story.
I see that Warzord, the board Time Lord, is asking me a question.
Oh yeah.
Who is your favorite Russian armored Iron Man villain? So basically, he's asking me to choose between Crimson Dynamo and the Titanium Man.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have a favorite. I think I like them both, honestly. I think they both had good stories with Tony. Early on, in his, like at the tail end of Tales of Suspense, there was the Tales of Suspense run, there was a multi-issue arc where basically the Titanium Man challenged Tony to a public fight that was being, filmed so that the entire world could watch it, because he wanted to prove basically the superiority of the USSR. And there's lots and lots of good stuff in that story. That's a good story that I should talk about at some point in the future. Just like I should talk about, you were talking about like the problems of maintaining the secret identity and having body doubles so that you could squirm around the questions of why aren't Tony and Iron Man ever seen in the same room together? Like, I should also talk about there was a 2-issue plot at like Iron Man 1819 or 1920 or 19 and 20. So back again in the late 1960s, there was a story that Tony builds basically a life model decoy, which gets referenced in the movies as kind of a joke. But it was a joke that a comic book fan was like, "Oh, haha, I know what they're doing there." But he had an actual life model decoy in the comics, and in this 2-issue arc, the life model decoy basically decides that he's a better Tony Stark than the real Tony Stark. So he basically convinces everyone that the real Tony Stark is the fake, kicks him out of his own factory, pushes him out into the streets, like, and he has to like survive on his own without having any help from anyone because everyone has been convinced that he is the fake Tony Stark. And that's kind of a fun, oh my god, story. I almost feel like that story ended a little too soon. That it could have gone on for a little while of him like struggling out in the streets, trying to figure out how he can retake back his life from this robot that has taken over his life. But that's another one I should do a video on. But anyway, I'm tangenting, so let us continue.
Well, I have a tangent of my own that occurred to me. Like my dad loves the song Magneto and Titanium Man, and I always knew like, yeah, those are the name of Marvel villains. I've always wondered, like, do you think the Beatles ever like talked about their like reading X-Men or Iron Man books to get their ideas for that song? That's something I also wondered, like, how did the Marvel bullpen react when they found out that their characters were being referenced in the Beatles song? I feel like there's got to be like some secret factoid knowledge out there about that.
Yeah, that's something maybe somebody should do some research on, see if we can unearth that reaction.
Read all the bullpen bulletins.
Yeah.
Okay. Iron Man, Marvel Adventures #4, Hostile Takeover, was written by Fred Van Lente, and the penciler was James Cordiero, and the inker was Gary Erskine. This one involves a kind of like hostile takeover, very appropriate title. One of the Hammer wants to take over Stark Industries. He gets this brilliant plan to engage in little corporate sabotage and try to buy up the stock at the last minute. And this kind of again brings in maybe like a little bit of that moral gray area where the shareholders don't like how, and Hammer especially don't like how Tony is, gallivanting all across the globe doing humanitarian adventures. They basically want him to focus on the business side of things. Meanwhile, what's his name? What's the guy's name? Spy Master, this professional
which is
saboteur.
Another one from the Rogues Gallery. Yeah,
yeah. He's got kind of like a funny, like smart aleck personality to him, but he's also like a really calculating professional. He snuck in and he has a code to override Tony Stark's armor. So when he activates the code, they're in complete control of the Iron Man armor, and they send Iron Man on a rampage. Fortunately for them, Hammer is mean to his secretary, so they can get at Hammer's secretary to get her to turn on him and help them out. But as Tony's Iron Man blowing up all kinds of stuff, Hammer is laughing to himself maniacally in the background. Rhodey tries to take out Spy Master and doesn't go so well for Rhodey, but they come up with a pretty creative plan where they trick Spy Master into frying what he thinks he's frying Iron Man, but really the armor's able to survive it, and once it reboots, he's free of control. They capture Spy Master and save the day, and they find proof to exonerate Tony and pin the crime. They find the evidence to convict Hammer of the crime. So Stark Industries is saved from going bankrupt, and the secretary comes to work at Stark Industries, and Pepper Potts is jealous because she secretly digs Tony Stark, and she just tsundere, and she won't admit it yet.
Yeah. And
Pretty good art. Yeah, I don't like this
yeah,
panel I froze on. I kind of got a weird Cheshire cat grin, but overall, I think the art for these series is pretty good. They get kind of like
yeah,
cartoonier artists. They have a little fun with it, so it's not like they're getting their absolutely best artists for these kids' books, but they are getting fun artists. All of the books feel like genuinely as exciting as the books that they were aiming at their older audience.
yeah. And I think that the style of art kind of fits for the target audience that they're writing these books for too.
Yeah.
So yeah. Um, and I also got asked Darth Vader, Crimson Dynamo, or the bumpy one. Probably the bumpy one. And yes, I think you're right, Warzord, that Stan probably did love that the Beatles were referencing his characters because I feel like Stan would love that publicity. I think he's right about that. um,
I just watched an interview where Stan talked about centerfold issue for Playboy or something with nothing but a comic book covering him up. Like he was such a character when it
yeah.
came to free publicity for Marvel Comics.
Well, he was very much about making money. Like he would even like in a lot of the Tales of Suspense mags that he wrote that had Iron Man stories in them that I've read. Um, the cover would just say point blank, oh, why is the cover this? Well, because I want you to buy this. Like,
Right.
yeah, he was never shy about saying that he wanted to make money selling comics. Like, so I'm sure, yeah, I think he would be very, very. I think he would have loved anything that increased his chances of making money on his comics. So,
I just kind of feel like when they write for kids, they preserve a little bit of that cornball sense of humor. Like Spy
mm,
Master, he's constantly like quipping, smart alecky lines as he's engaging in corporate espionage. Sometimes Tony
yeah,
has to have like a relaxed sense of humor about the whole situation. Sometimes they
yeah,
explain the technology things with really simple uh, metaphors. Like if you are a child and you don't know what a corporate takeover is, they
yeah,
basically, show you pictures of the stock is going down. He's going to buy the
yeah,
stock and then he'll own Stark Industries. So
yeah,
they're very aware of, kind of like they're having a young audience and
yeah,
explaining it for the young audience. Well, it still has that exciting, dramatic element that works for the older audience as well. It's a really good balance of tone, I think.
yeah,
Fun without thinking you're knowing that a younger, inexperienced person might read this, but you're not stupid. If you're a kid, you can handle a corporate
stonks going
takeover
down.
story.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
stocks
like
only go
one,
up.
yeah. I thought stonks only go up. Yeah. Um, but yeah, and that's one of the things that's nice about these issues too, just in general. If we can expand out to kind of general commentary, a couple of things I like about this series is that they're using the classic rogues gallery, right? They are so you have the Mandarin, which is basically Tony's most famous adversary, and then you have Spy Master, who's also pretty high up there in the rogues gallery. Um, Plantman, not really so much, but they're and Justin Hammer. That's another classic one from the Rhodes Gallery. So they are like using the material from classic 616 Tony Stark, but they're just remixing it a little for the young audience, but they're not really, I don't feel like they're oversimplifying or dumbing down who these characters are, right? They're explaining them in a way that a young audience can understand, but they're not like changing them into something that's fundamentally different from what they originally are in the original comics. Um, and the other thing, and you kind of hit upon it when you talked about how they handle the concept of a corporate takeover. They didn't assume that a kid would not understand what a corporate takeover is. Instead, they explained it in a clear way that an 8-year-old reading this would understand.
Yep.
So just in general, these books aren't dumbed down. They assume that a kid would understand the idea of moral gray areas, that they would understand corporate takeovers. that they would understand the kind of little bit of irresponsibility in the Tony Stark character, right? And they don't make it so stupidly on the nose and obvious as a lot of the modern comics do what you're supposed to think about that. They just present it like this is what's happening, and they kind of let the kid figure it out for themselves. So they don't they don't talk down to the kids who are supposed to be reading this the way a lot of modern YA center comics do, you know. So that's just in general, that is the positive thing about the Marvel Adventures line is, well, one of the big positive things. The other one is that they do focus mainly, although they put in, they have suggestions of moral gray areas and suggestions of, you know, potential issues that you might want to think about in terms of how responsible are, you know, defense contractors for what happens with the things they make and so on. But primarily the focus is on, you know, Tony is Iron Man. He fights a bad guy. It's fun. There are fights.
Yeah.
Like, so the central focus is on the fun aspect and not on the message or the hectoring. And that's what makes them superior to the comics that they're trying to write for kids now. Well, a lot of the comics that they're trying to write for kids now. I have since encountered some comics that avoid that completely. I've been very happy to find them. So, and a lot of. Go ahead.
No deconstruction. It says Warzord.
Yeah, no deconstruction. Right. Yeah.
A very specific detail that jumped out to me was in issue 1. When he's thinking and saying, he says, Yinsen, that guy was the world's top expert on microtransistors back in the day. So it alluded to the classic miniaturized transistor thing and from the old comics, right? Like they have him
my tiny
do, like,
propellers, do your work. Yeah. Uh-huh. The
I thought of you when I read that.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and no deconstruction. Yeah, no deconstruction at all. They let Tony stand on his own terms. They don't go into like what the modern writers for adults always try to do, which is you know, we're going to have an entirely new view of Tony Stark that will totally blow your mind and change your view of the character entirely. And it always ends up being some unasked for retcon, or, you know, oh yeah, Tony Stark is not actually a Stark. He was adopted by Howard and Maria, and his real parents are like a rock star and a Hydra agent. Yeah. That's gonna totally blow your mind and completely change your view of Tony Stark as a character. You know, when I got to that point in his canon, I was like, why did they do this? This was unnecessary. Like, but it's always like,
you have to care who Tony Stark is for that to work.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't know who Tony Stark is, why do you care who his parents are, basically?
Yeah. But also, like, but if you know the character, it would piss you off even more, because me, as someone who knew the character, by the time I got to reading that run, which was Kieran Gillen's run, and, you know, Kieran Gillen has done some good stuff, but that was not one of the good things that was done. Because if you know the character, then you know that a lot of, in Volume 1, later on in Volume 1, when they started talking about Tony's relationship to his father more, his relationship to Howard more, that added a lot to the character. And then saying that, oh, but he's not biologically related, so I mean, it could still work as, oh, really, you know, he treated Tony that way because really he wanted his real son, and Tony was just the replacement. But I don't think they really got into that deeply enough in the Kieran Gillen run for that to actually, for that to actually be a valid explanation for what was being done there. So, and then you have Bendis, who decides halfway through his run that, well, we're just going to replace him with an entirely new character because everyone wanted that. They weren't attached to Tony at all, right? And no, Kieran Gillen, Kieron, I think, Gillen. I might have that wrong, but okay. Marm lost his connection for a second, so now I'm going to run this on my own. Oh, he's back. All right, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
All right.
Yeah. And this one last comment, and then they had Tom Taylor, who was Tom Taylor, and also the name just fell out of my head, but Rick Remender. Yeah, Rick Remender, who did the he did basically the inversion wave that turned a bunch of evil characters good and turned a bunch of good characters evil, including Tony. And then Tom Taylor jumped off of that and did 9 issues of Superior Iron Man, where he just like went full throttle on the Iron Man as a supervillain idea. We didn't like that when you did it in the late 90s or the mid 90s when you did The Crossing, which is another thing I should do a video about because, oh my God, that was bad. We didn't like it the first time and we don't like it now. And besides, the worst thing about Superior Iron Man was they basically assassinated all the supporting characters by assuming that after one attempt to get Tony uninverted, they would just give up, which I don't see like Pepper or Rhodey ever giving up on Tony, especially if they knew that this wasn't Tony himself acting this way, but this was him under the influence of essentially a magic spell. Like they would find some way to break that spell, right? So anyway, I'm going to stop complaining about recent runs of Iron Man that have done terrible things to the character. And just let you comment now.
I feel like a test of how well anyone understands how well they understand the supporting cast. Like, if you don't like Jimmy Olsen, you should not write Superman. Brian Michael Bendis, if you don't like Superboy, you should write Superman. If you like Spider-Man, you ought to like Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy.
Right. And you shouldn't seek to break up Spider-Man's marriage. I saw your post on Twitter. Yeah. I saw your post on Twitter. Yeah. Brokenhearted. Yeah.
Munchie Sanchu says Simpsons had the same problem with Skinner as Iron Man has with his dad. Simpsons geeks don't like it when you mess around with even like a side character like Principal Skinner because they become invested in the universe. So I think it's every problem a new writer has when they have to inherit a bunch of older characters. Is nerds may be more invested in the characters than even the writers are.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I cringed at the rescue spinoff of the Iron Man 2020. And yes, I'm probably the only person in the universe that read every single book that was connected to that trash fire of an event. But the rescue spinoff annoyed me because it didn't portray Pepper the way she actually is, but it portrayed her as basically a whiny bitch, kind of like Hellcat is being portrayed now in the current run. Like they're departing from the way these female characters were written in the past, just so they can push forward their feminist message, and it annoys me in both cases. So.
So I got a real kick out of the Marvel Adventures books that we basically reviewed all the issues that are in Volume 1 this time. It might be fun to continue doing that, just kind of to see the contrast of how Marvel approaches these characters when it's in a kid's book versus when it's in the main line.
Yeah.
Looks like one thing I noticed is they'll have more of like the famous guest stars. show
Yeah.
up. Like if Hulk shows up as a guest star, he's going to say Hulk smash. If Spider-Man shows up as a guest star, he's going to do some web slinging action. It's kind of like they
Yeah.
know who they know who the A-listers are when it's for 8-year-olds. They forget who the A-listers are when it's for local comic book shops.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Munchie-san, she said, oh, okay. I'm not sure if he's talking about Principal Skinner or Tony Stark. It might apply to both, though. Once it's revealed that his mother isn't his mother, the character no longer makes sense. Actually, that applies to them both equally, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. I mean, well, not so much with Tony, because the fact that he was adopted doesn't change that he lived with Howard Stark through all of his childhood, but but I feel like if it does anything, it makes it easier for Tony to just say, well, I no longer have to ruminate over what Howard thought of me. Like, because I know he wasn't real. You're not my dad, as the internet screams. Like, you know, he could just be like, oh, well, he was an asshole and he's not my real dad anyway, so I'm not going to think about him anymore, which does kind of ruin your opportunities to talk about what Howard did to him, you know, in the future. Yeah. So
maybe this is like a One More Day came up. I feel like for the late 2000s generation, they felt like, okay, we've got to do something with these characters. So it's not just, endless, normalcy forever. We want to do something dramatic. In previous generations, they'd kill off Gwen Stacy. They'd do something, that would really change these characters' life and circumstances. But I feel like they felt like we either have to take them back to square one. We've got to kill off their marriage. We've got to get them back to where they were in 1960. Or they would do something really dramatic, like we've got to have Dr. Octopus take over his brain. We've got to turn him evil to sort of change the entire tone of what the character is right now. And maybe there needs to be like a middle ground where, especially in the kids' books, there's got to be like a fun, normalcy. Like there's got to be like a fun universe where Iron Man is just always Iron Man and he's just out there saving the day. And maybe in the adult centric comics, you can have, character development. And I think the main problem is because death doesn't matter and because they keep resetting the universe. There's no way for an adult to be invested in it for that long. People get invested in it because it's so nerdy and complex, but we're not really like Tony hasn't grown into a father. Which is something I said before. Is like Tony needs to be a father now because that's the most mature development for the character.
Yeah. And I think, and you actually reminded me of something else that I haven't mentioned yet about new issue 5, is that I wasn't 100% satisfied with that final confrontation with Korvac, because like they had the monologuing at each other about what their philosophies were, but I feel like it kind of ignores recent history, in the sense that if you go back to Civil War II, and you can say many things, most of them negative, about Civil War II, but one of the things that actually was kind of significant to me and somewhat positive is the fact that after Tony was on the side of the authorities in Civil War I, in Civil War II, he switches sides and becomes the side of no, we're not going to accuse people of pre-crime and put them into camps to prevent them from things that they might do in the future. That's just wrong, right? So he, I felt like that was an indication of some character growth right there. I mean, in fairness, because he erased his brain in the beginning of the Matt Fraction run, he doesn't actually remember all of the emotional fallout of what happened after Civil War. But like he intellectually knows enough to know that a lot of people were very pissed at him about that. And so that probably drove how he responded to what Carol was doing in Civil War II. So like, why couldn't we use that? Because Tony still remembers that, because at the end of Iron Man 2020, there's this conversation between Carol and Tony that was done absolutely execrably by Dan Slott, where Carol's like, "Oh, does it now that you're back in a real physical body that is genetically yours, does this mean I'm forgiven for killing you?" And they kind of wave it off like, "Oh, it's no big deal that." I'm like, "Whoa, that's wrong in 1,000 different ways."
It's
But
basically
it didn't.
I wouldn't envy being a writer trying to make sense of all of these convoluted events, but I feel
Yeah,
like you have to do something with it
yeah,
that it has to. It's like internal logic. So if you come up with magic, that's great. Come up with any magic system you want, but don't have the magic system logically contradict its own rules. If you have these kooky events, have the emotional fallout at least be at a minimum, at least acknowledge the emotional fallout of that. Send them on some buddy adventure where Carol has to make up for it to Tony by like saving his family or something. He says, "Okay, now I guess I'll forgive you for killing me that one time." Right? Even if it's kind of corny, at least you're not just hand waving it away entirely.
yeah.
Or
But
even
it
kind
was,
of like this classic thing where they're sort of hand waving it away, but they're at least acknowledging the reader is thinking about it.
yeah,
So we'll come up with some kind of reason that'll get the reader to accept it as okay, they're buddies now again. They forgave each other.
yeah. But definitely there were a couple of hand wavy references to it in Dan Slott's run that I feel didn't do justice to what actually happened there. Um, so and then at the end of Iron Man 2020 was the worst of all, um because it was like, am I forgiven for killing you? Ha ha, I guess so. Like, really? I think Tony would still resent her a little bit for a little bit longer, So, um, so that was like 100% insulting to me. But the reason I mention it is because it proves that he remembers everything that happened then. So, um, so that means that for the Cantwell run, like, he should still remember that he basically switched sides in Civil War II and the reasons for why he did, right? And what weren't any of those reasons brought up when he's going up against Korvac, and Korvac is basically arguing, isn't it better if someone just runs the world as a godlike power, and oh,
Which
maybe
is
you're just
something.
subjected to me. Yeah.
Where's the editor? Where's the editor could say hey, Cantwell, in the last story arc, Iron Man switched sides. See if you can work that in. And it just basically takes one line of Tony Stark thinking, "I learned in the last fight that no one should have ultimate power. Now I will apply that now."
Yeah,
They're forgetting their own events in writing kind of like
yeah,
the standard books. Welcome John
yeah.
Dillard and welcome the Bunderdome.
Oh, the
Where
Thunderdome's here. Oh,
yep.
snap.
He loves it. He loves it when I'm doing comic books and not doing like weird video games for Zoomers.
Or weird, yeah, or weird weird shit
Oh
posting.
yeah,
Like,
let's just roast the number one, the absolute state of the number one Marmaduke fan show in 2021. You thought America was bad. What am I even doing? No one knows.
yeah, who knows? Yeah. Um, yeah, there's no editing and continuity in Marvel. Yeah, not anymore. Like, here's the thing. Back in the 70s, Iron Man hit kind of an unstable period before Michelini and Layton came in, um, where Iron Man was being traded around to a lot of different writers. There wasn't like a consistent writer who was on the title for a very long time. It tended to get traded back and forth. Maybe because of Deadline Doom, which was often mentioned a lot in the bullpens and stuff, or just because, like, I think it was mainly like Deadline Doom, or the writer was overwhelmed with other titles or something like that. So the Iron Man title got traded back and forth between a lot of writers in the 70s. But back then there was editing and there was continuity. So, you could have 3 different issues in a row that were done by 3 different writers. I'm not sure if that actually happened, but it was something that could have happened in that period. And whoever took the baton next always paid attention to what happened previously and continued it on, like regardless of whatever he wanted to do. Now, each new writer would do whatever he wanted to do too, but he also respected whatever the previous one had done. But yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. Each new writer wants to do his take, and he doesn't really want to do more than basically head fakes towards things that have been done before, unless it's somehow critical to the plot. Like, all of the
We
writers.
basically need it. We need Elseworlds for really like if a writer's earned his spurs and wants to do like a weird alternate take on Tony Stark, you go to the Elseworlds World Series, and if it's brilliant, then it's the new Dark Knight Returns, and if it's stupid, then
Right.
its stupidity is contained basically in that was another universe. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, and once upon a time, people did create Elseworlds. You have Iron Man Noir, which is really great. And they brought Iron Man back for the most recent Spider-Man Noir, which was wait, I thought he was dead. Like in the Secret Worlds event, he was killed in one of the spin-off issues of Secret Worlds. But then Margaret Stoll was like, haha, just kidding. No, he's alive. And everyone who liked Iron Man Noir was like, yay! Because I wanted to see more, because the Iron Man Noir was back in the World War II period. And when I read Iron Man Noir, I was like, oh man, they should have continued with this and have like Iron Man Noir meeting up with World War II Captain America and fighting Nazis together. That's what I wanted to see. Like, but now that Stoll has resurrected them, maybe someone can come along and write that, because I really want to see that. And then, in previous streams that I've done in a previous stream that I did with you back on my birthday, I believe, I mentioned 1872, which was a Secret World spinoff. And that was a great Elseworlds Tony too. Oh my gosh, that's like the most adorable Elseworlds Tony ever. I want to see more of that. Bring that back. But yeah, so they've had Elseworlds in the past. There's no reason why they couldn't bring that back again. Let some writers that, as you say, have earned their spurs try for some like alternate timeline takes or of the character, so that they will have the kind of freedom from continuity to do what they want to do with the character. But if you're in mainline continuity, like you really do have to respect what has come before. Otherwise, you're going to make a lot of comic book nerds very, very pissed at you.
We got a couple questions that I think both of these would be for you, the right Geek, because I'm not an Iron Man nerd. So one Munchie Sanchu asks how your Iron Man stories are coming, and Warzard asks if Extremis is considered Elseworlds or canon. And I'm too much of a fake geek guy. I don't even know what Extremis is. Like, does that ring a bell for you?
Extremis is the one that Warren Ellis did back in 2004. It was a 6-issue a plot in which and this is something I'm going to do a video on too, because it's kind of like Maximum. Tony is so obsessed with armor that he eventually ends up injecting it into his own bones. Like that is considered canon, I believe, because he does continue the effects of the Extremis that he injects into his body in Extremis get carried on by the next writers. So he has Extremis. He actually has Extremis during the Civil War storyline, and he has Extremis when he is serving as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I believe that is canon. He eventually loses it later on in the canon, but it is something that is something that has happened and is not an Elseworld, basically.
Nice.
Yeah. And then how are my Iron Man stories going? I've been posting a lot of stuff for the MCU normies. I haven't started with the comics ideas yet, because those are a little more convoluted. And I feel like I feel like they should be accompanied by my kind of brand of illustrations too. Because if you're doing stories that are based on the comics, I feel like the medium used for that should match the medium they came from. Like, so like I want to be able to do like at least some illustrations for the comic based stories I'm doing. But I've been writing down all of the ideas that I've been coming up with. Like I was going to write an Elseworld in which the aforementioned life model decoy plot goes on a lot longer. Because I was like, actually somebody on the letters page wrote in and said, oh, it's a shame that ended so quickly, because this could have been really interesting if he had to make it on his own in the streets with no support from anyone whatsoever, and he has to work his way back up to taking back over his own life. And I was like, that's a really great idea. I'm gonna do that. And then of course, I might do kind of like, how Zach was doing Rebirth. I might do Cantwell rewrite. I might do Cantwell rewrite to try to rehab the few things that are actually good about this run, and try to fix the things that are not working. I don't know what I don't. Cantwell rewrite is sort of my is my working title, but obviously I need something clever like Rebirth. I don't know what clever name I could come up with it.
I still think we need some kind of legal doujinshi equivalent for Western comics. Like you submit a doujin, and if Marvel thinks if it goes viral and the company thinks it's brilliant, I don't know, maybe you get some minor royalties off of it. Maybe they're afraid it would open him up to all kinds of lawsuits or whatever. But there's got to be some legal way of saying, if you do X, then you can legally write these stories. And that's what happened with the Black Suited Spider-Man. Black Suited Spider-Man was just some guy's fan art of what if Peter Parker wore the Spider-Woman costume. And a Marvel editor noticed that, asked to buy the rights to it, probably bought it for $200. And then that became a major Spider-Man suit for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Either that, or I'm going to have to wait until, a bunch of SJWs start piling on to Marvel saying that Iron Man is problematic and you should just scrap him. And then wait to see if they do divorce themselves from that and send them out into the ether where someone can pick them up. But yeah, like they're trying to do with Punisher.
Sweet public domain Batman and Superman. Well, we're gonna be old farts before Iron Man and Spider-Man become public domain.
Yeah, because Spider-Man was 62, Iron Man was 63, so we're gonna have to wait a while.
That's one for the Zoomers and the Zoomers kids to take on that mantle.
Yeah. But yeah, they're like, oh, yeah, we're going to completely disassociate from this character because he's problematic. Who wants to buy him? And then I'll be like, okay, let's set up a GoFundMe, or let's do this. But yeah.
So we're expecting issue 6 of New Iron Man later this month, right?
No, February. It's kind of a weird schedule. Yeah, it's weird because usually, well, so far Iron Man has come out mid-month, but for some reason this month it came out first week, and I'm not sure why, but I believe February is the next date.
Okay. So if you have your channel back, we'll probably be there. If your channel isn't back online by then I can host. Do you have any what is it? Juicy details you can share with us about what happened? Did you mention the word election on a stream or something, and YouTube brought the hammer down on you?
No, it was a copyright strike on a video in which I was reviewing 3 comics, and I'm pretty sure I showed very little of each of those 3 comics. and that I wasn't reading them out loud or anything. So I'm pretty damn sure. I'm pretty damn sure it falls under fair use. So I have objected to that strike, as I feel is my right, and hopefully it will come through in my favor. So
you can also download it, and if it does come against you, you could just like do some fancy editing, like put a giant Iron Man chibi in front of it or whatever. It happened to me once.
Oh yeah, I have to cover this.
I think a manga company got over eager to claim stuff, and if someone doesn't speak the language I'm speaking, they don't know the difference between a review and just reading it out loud.
Yeah. And the claimant does look to be an Asian name, so it was probably because one of the things I reviewed was a manga. Actually, it was 2 manga, so it could have been either one. So that might be that might be exactly what happened. But hopefully, when YouTube reviews it, they'll realize that I believe it definitely falls under fair use. So,
all right. So hopefully justice
favor.
will prevail on YouTube for once.
Iron Man equals Trump. Iron Man equals Trump, says Munchie Sonu. Yeah.
Billionaire. Larger than life personality, outsized flaws.
Yeah. Kind of a playboy.
There's an Elseworlds book for you. What if Donald Trump invented the Iron Man armor?
Oh man. I would write
Iron Wall.
Donald Trump takes control of the Iron Man armor.
He's at the moment where he was billions of dollars in debt and at the bottom of his career and fought his way out. All kinds of stuff to take inspiration from.
Oh man. I thought you were going to say Tony Stark as president. Which would also be
they've never pulled that angle.
Yeah. No, the closest they've ever got was Tony Stark as Secretary of Defense, which happened in the early 2000s. Or Tony Stark attempting to run for president, like a Michael Bloomberg thing, but more competent because he's actually smart,
Right. We got to be careful. We'll get an idea, and the next will be Iron Man 2024.
Iron Man 2024. Which
all right.
I don't know. Okay, anyway.
Do you have any closing thoughts on the comic books we've reviewed for today's discussion?
Not really. I think all that I have said is all I wanted to say. I just want to add again that I have found things in every issue that did not completely honk me off. So I think that Cantwell has a lot more promise than, say, Dan Slott. And that's aside from the art, that's probably the one reason why I'm sticking around for this run. Otherwise, I probably would follow Thinking Criticals or Perch's suggestion that if you don't like something, stop reading it. But the problem is that there are some things about this that I do like, so that's why I'm not stopping.
I'm kind of withholding judgment.
It gets better. Yeah,
I'm kind of withholding judgment on the new Iron Man. I've seen little things, and sometimes a writer comes off to a bad start, but then they find their groove and really start making it work. So hopefully, if Cantwell sticks the landing on this last issue, I'd be willing to stick it out a little longer and see if Cantwell has some good ideas or a good direction for Iron Man. So a little to hope for. Not a perfect series so far. And just my overall thought on Marvel Adventures Iron Man was fantastic kids comics. They're fun to read as an adult as well, and a great throwback to kind of 2007, 2008 era Marvel. They were just 4 really fun, dumb, straightforward Iron Man adventures with just a little bit of a nice, mature heart mixed in without going too far.
One last question before we sign off. Would you vote for Tony if you didn't know he was Iron Man? Which in the 616. Well, no, in the 616,
such a ladies man. The idea of having a ladies man president, that's just way too funny.
Yeah. And it's something that has precedent. like in the real world. But well, the other thing is like as far as like where he would land politically, well, it depends on. I think it all depends on like which version of Tony you're talking about. Are you talking about the real Tony from the classic era, where he was kind of he was a centrist who believed that, oh yeah, sure, we have problems with the environment, and sometimes war, war on foreign nations that aren't really in our security interests are a bad idea. Like, and of course that anti-globalist speech that we found in that one issue. I mean,
Yeah.
He's got some like, well, as far as the environment is concerned, his opinion is, yeah, we have problems with the environment, but there are ways that we can solve it technologically without crashing the economies of all first world nations, right? So he would kind of fall on the centrist line. It would depend on who he was running against, honestly. Like, but like
I
I
feel
would
like
consider
Marvel
him.
would always have to like take the out and say, "Oh, he's running as a third party candidate," right? Like that's the classic way of getting away with it, because then that forces the
Yeah,
reader to like turn off the party affiliation part of their brain and say, "Okay,
yeah,
what are Tony Stark's policy
yeah,
prescriptions here?"
yeah, yeah.
And Munchie says any version you want. So like, are there more liberal or more conservative versions of Tony? Like I know that Ultimate Captain America, they made him a little bit more like
Conservative.
deliberately patriotic as
Yeah,
a way of kind of playing that up. So it
yeah,
could there could be some variety depending on the verse.
yeah. Tony versus Steve. Yeah, that would be interesting. Although I think we've had in recent history, I think we've had enough of Tony versus Steve. Honestly,
Right.
yeah,
Only been friends.
it was good the first couple of times, but if you play that hand too much, then it becomes like, really, we're gonna put them at odds again, like, or goodish the first couple of times. There were good again. There were good things about the Civil War. Like what one day, I mean, you've said that you had a debate once with somebody who was like, no, Civil War should be entirely expunged from Marvel history. No one should ever talk
Yeah.
about it again. Whereas you were like, well, if it was an Elseworld, it would be okay. Like,
Right. My little like quote unquote debate with the matriarchy. Yeah. I and the
yeah,
thing
yeah,
is,
yeah,
what was funny about it was he absolutely hated it, and I
yeah.
didn't really like it, but I was kind of playing devil's advocate for it.
Uh-huh.
I definitely feel like
And I'm
Civil
like,
War was the start of the big event obsession at Marvel.
yeah, it was definitely the point where, um, it was definitely the breaking point for a lot of characters, although you didn't start noticing it really until a couple years later. But
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, actually, as Perch has demonstrated, the Civil War itself actually was a sales boon for a lot of the Marvel line.
Yeah.
Despite the fact
I
that a lot of
remember
us hate it.
I
Like,
remember lots
yeah,
of people just talking about it.
yeah,
It definitely succeeded on the getting people chatting and
getting
running
people to
to
be
check it
interested.
out
Yeah,
side of things.
yeah, and
But maybe at the cost
and
of long-term health.
yeah. So it caused a long term help, but in the short term, like I'm even a little further to the, I don't know if you would call it right or left. I guess left. I don't know, than you, and that I'm um, like I actually half liked it, depending on which book you were reading, because there were so many books that were tied into that event. There was like 106 books, like there was 106 books, and I attempted to read them all until I was like, actually, some of these side quests, I'm actually not interested at all. I'm really just interested in the the core story and
Right.
the conflict between Tony and Steve. So eventually, like I got almost all the way through all 106 books, but then eventually some of the titles I was just like, no, I'm noping out. I'm not particularly interested. Like it's not really addressing characters that I have any attachment to at all. So,
Yeah.
but there were some, like, I'm in the position of, there were some definite like emotional highlights about that in that event. But yeah, as far as its role in fueling the everything has to be an event now culture, it was definitely the turning point, the negative turning point, or the jumping the shark moment for Marvel there. And in terms of breaking the character, like, you know, all Cap fans say that Cap didn't really come back after that.
Yeah.
And arguably, Tony didn't really either. So yeah. So although again, you didn't really start noticing it as an obvious issue until a couple of years later. So yeah.
Which is one of the other nice things about the kids' continuity books is they don't seem to care. Like Tony Stark and Iron Man can just be buddies that go on adventures in some of these books. So I've always thought there ought to be what I call like a Bugs Bunny continuity for some of these characters where it doesn't matter what traumatic experiences they've had. There ought to be just like a basic place where they just go on adventures together, and that's the whole point of the line. Do you know, is there an ongoing, I guess I have seen some kids' books coming out in recent years for Marvel, but they don't really have it under like the label of Marvel Adventures like they used to. It's usually just like some kind of like spin-off series that has a really, you know, kid-centric focus to it.
Yeah, there's new stuff that IDW is doing that are all ages.
Yeah.
I don't think it's called Marvel Adventures though. I'm looking it up because I bought a couple. I haven't had a chance to read them, but I'm looking up here in my books here. Let me see. I don't think it's called Marvel Adventures, but it's something that IDW is doing.
It's kind of interesting that they had that partnership when you think about it, because Marvel already has a lot of publishing power. So
yeah, I believe it's called. Let me find it. Trying to find it.
While the right geek is looking for that, if you guys have any Iron Man centric suggestions for us, please add them, because I think we're going to keep working on the 2020 the new series coming out. We'll probably keep working our way through some of the classic oldies and maybe some of the Marvel Adventures books. But if you have any Iron Man recommendations for us, let us know, and we could look into it.
Or things you want to see because it's a storyline you really liked or a storyline you really hated. I saw that Warzord mentioned that he noped out on
Thunderdome says Marvel Action. He did covers for them. Marvel Action books. Okay.
Marvel Action. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I just found it. So that's the new name of the all ages line that IDW is doing in partnership with Marvel. Yeah. I bought a couple to see how they are. I haven't had a chance to read them, but if I do and I feel like that they are interesting fodder for commentary, I might suggest that we talk about those. You know, and of course I have other ideas in mind of Doom versus Iron Man. Oh yeah, those are good. Yeah, so we have like in the classic era, we have Tony Stark and Doctor Doom going back in time and meeting and back in time to the time of Arthurian legend, right? And meeting King Arthur and all of that. Yeah, that's something. Those are good books. We can talk about those. I've already mentioned some of the ones that I want to talk about. I actually it's shocking because I did the Denny O'Neil alcoholism storyline. I have not done Demon in the Bottle, which is much more name recognized, but so I should do that at some point. I've been planning to do that. I do want to talk about Extremis, and Warzord mentioned that I think it was Warzord. Let me scroll back a second. Where did you talk about that? Someone said that they noped out.
With teenage Tony Stark in the 90s.
Teenage Tony Stark, yeah, he noped out on that. Yeah, so that's The Crossing. I already mentioned that I was going to talk about that and how that is worthy of hatred in so many ways.
And by the way, I know nothing about any of this. I probably have of all the Marvel heroes, I probably have the least knowledge of Tony Stark. I think I only ever encountered him through Avengers comics before the movie came out, and that obviously
Yeah.
like that transformed him kind of like into a A-list character for Marvel, that movie. So well, I
Yeah.
can still keep taking my baby steps, reading the old timey comics with you as well. And maybe we'll just like throw one of these at me for like a culture shock for me.
Yeah. Although, I would say that I like the MCU, but it can be argued validly that the MCU has also distorted how Tony's being written in the comics now. Like,
Yeah,
the problem is that the problem is not that they're trying to bring in the normies by making him more like the movie Tony. The problem is they're trying to bring in the normies by making him more like the movie Tony, but they're doing it badly because what they're taking from movie Tony is all the superficial stuff, like, oh, he's a smartass, he makes a wisecrack. They keep all of that, and they miss like the whole underbelly of oh, by the way, he has post-traumatic stress disorder, and like and actually in private he is kind of this ball of self-doubt, and that all of that stuff gets missed, and they basically write him as the quippy wisecracking smartass without and they miss all of the like underlying depth of the movie character. And if you want to bring in the movie, and if you want to bring in the new movie normies, as you keep saying, mature him and make him a father, like, because the people watching the movies really, really connected to that, and I did too, even though it has nothing to do with anything that has happened in the comics. But it's something that I like.
I mean, I can't think of an old character. I can't think of an old character from like the golden or silver age era that hasn't been helped by letting them grow up and get married. Because will Superman marry Lois Lane? They stretched that out for like 30 or 40 years. So by the time they did it, like every Superman fan was saying, yeah, we're good. We don't need another 20 years of will they, won't they with Clark Kent and Lois.
Yeah.
It's such a natural direction.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, I think that's what people are getting wrong with the they everyone wants to do something new, right? But like what they define as new is we're going to deconstruct the character again and blow your mind by retconning something that you thought was true about this character, but oh my god, you were wrong. The character is totally different. Whereas like the new that readers want is not that, but like actual growth in the character or actual indications that the whole continuity so far has had an impact on how he makes decisions. That's the kind of new that actually should be done. So yeah, allowing him to grow and get married and have children, like and have him deal with the doubts that would accompany that because of how much baggage he has there regarding parents. That would actually be a way to do something new with the character that would not, in fact, deconstruct him, but would, in fact, respect all the things that have come before. So,
Tevya Smolka says, "Take note, Marvel. Let your characters grow up and mature." Nice.
yes.
And he even has Superman with Jonathan Kent as his profile picture. That's just perfect. That's just a perfect picture comment pairing right there.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So in future, check out the link in the description below for the Right Geeks channel. You can see our commentary on issues 1 through 4 of the series. We also talk about some of the classic, old timey issues that first introduced the character. So we will be back. Yep. We will be back with more discussion of brand new Iron Man comics and some older stuff to mix it up a little bit. Thank you, Tevya. Thank you, the Bunderdome, POTUS Thump, for joining us. And thank you to my guest, the Right Geek, and the real geek girl of the two of us when it comes to Iron Man comics. I'm your humble Iron Man noob, #1 Marmaduke fan, and it's been a blast. So we'll catch you all later.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye.